Welcome back, weavers. The story is in motion. Fate, once placed in your hands, has been set. The path advances. Weave responsibly.
Some patterns do not repeat by accident, though Morgan would not have been able to say when that understanding first took hold, or why it had settled so deeply into her thoughts that it now accompanied her without invitation. It lingered as she shut down her computer, as the store around her thinned into that peculiar hollow quiet that belonged only to the end of a workday, when the steady hum of fluorescent lights seemed to press more insistently against the silence, and even the smallest sounds carried farther than they should. The day had begun as every other did, shaped by routine and softened by familiarity. Yet somewhere along its quiet progression, something had shifted, leaving behind the faint but persistent impression that it had not unfolded quite as it should have. It was not a disruption she could name, only a subtle misalignment, as though the pattern itself had slipped slightly out of step. Jade emerged from the back room just as she was slipping her bag over her shoulder. Morgan was still focused on closing out her register with careful precision. Numbers aligned, drawer counted. Jade leaned against the counter with the easy familiarity of someone who had long ago decided that boundaries were less rules and more like guidelines. "If you say you're staying late, I'm reporting you," Jade said, tilting her head just enough to suggest she was only half joking. "I refuse to be friends with someone who voluntarily spends extra time here. It's morally suspicious." "I'm leaving," Morgan replied, glancing once more at the screen before shutting it off completely. "Good," Jade said, straightening. "Because I've already committed to something fried and regrettable for dinner, and I need you to validate that decision like a responsible adult." "You don't need validation," Morgan said, a faint trace of a smile touching her voice. "You're going to do it anyway." "That's true," Jade admitted. "But shared bad decisions feel less like flawed personality traits." They walked out together, their steps falling into an easy rhythm as they walked through the main doors. The late afternoon air met them with that familiar shift, the subtle release that came from stepping out of a contained space into one that moved freely and without pause. The city stretched around them in its usual form, layered with motion and sound, each part continuing with quiet indifference to the lives moving within it. Morgan pulled the door closed behind them and paused, her hand lingering on the handle as she turned the key in the lock. She felt the mechanism catch with a soft, definite finality, yet something in her resisted leaving it at that. She tested the handle once, then again, the second check unnecessary even as she did it, though she could not bring herself to skip it. Jade watched her with mild curiosity and amusement. "Are we expecting a heist?" she asked. "Or are you just feeling especially protective of the staplers today?" "I just wanted to make sure. Extra lockiness," Morgan joked, stepping back. "Well," Jade replied, glancing at the door as if reassessing its worth. "If someone is determined enough to break in for office supplies, I don't think your second tug is going to be the thing that stops them. But I admire the optimism." Morgan exhaled quietly, offering no response. They quickly walked toward the corner where their paths would split. Conversation moved easily between them, touching briefly on inconsequential things. Something someone had said earlier, a passing complaint about work. Yet Morgan found herself only half present within it. Her thoughts drifted, circling back despite her efforts to dismiss them. Back to the man, to the way he had spoken, to the way he had known her name, to the quiet, persistent wrongness he had left behind. Jade, unfortunately, did not share her desire to forget. "I'm still not over that guy," Jade said. The confidence alone was alarming. Walking in like he had a membership and knowing your name? Either mystery shopper or future murder documentary subject. Morgan said nothing. "I'm serious," Jade continued. "People don't just do that. It's either corporate espionage or he's the world's least subtle serial killer." "I don't think he was either of those," Morgan said quietly. "Great," Jade replied. "So we've narrowed it down to unsettling for unknown reasons. Love that for us." They reached the corner where their paths split, slowing as the familiar moment of separation settled between them. "Text me when you get home, so I know you didn't wander off mid-thought into traffic," Jade joked. "I won't." "That's what they all say," Jade replied. "It's always the quiet ones." Morgan almost smiled, though the expression did not quite reach the surface. Jade studied her for a moment longer, her expression softening. "You're okay, right?" "I'm fine," Morgan said. The answer came too quickly, though the words felt more like expectation than certainty. "Okay," Jade said, but not pressing. "Go home, eat something. Do something that requires zero emotional investment." "I'll try." "Don't try," Jade said. "Commit to mediocrity. It's healing." With that, she turned and headed down her street, already pulling out her phone, already absorbed in something else. Morgan watched her go for a moment longer than necessary, then turned in the opposite direction. The city absorbed the distance between them almost immediately. Everything continued as it should. People passed without acknowledgement. Conversations overlapped and dissolved. Footsteps rose and fell in steady rhythm. Nothing suggested that anything was out of place. And yet, the unease remained. As Morgan approached the subway entrance, her gaze lifted without conscious decision. A man stood near the railing. Recognition settled into her awareness with quiet certainty. He was positioned at an angle, half-turned, as though suspended between movements, one hand resting lightly against the metal, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the space. He felt all sorts of wrong, like something pretending to be human and failing miserably. Morgan stopped mid-step. Panic started to settle in around her, and the rest of the street seemed to recede slightly, her focus narrowing as she shifted her path, just enough to bring him more clearly into view. Someone passed between them. Another followed. The interruption lasted no more than a moment. When it cleared, the space was empty. There was no movement to follow, no direction her eyes could trace. The absence was immediate, complete, as though the space itself had simply removed him. He was gone. Morgan remained still, searching for something that would restore order to what she had just seen. There was nothing. She only became aware of her building as she stood in front of it. The street noise softened as she stepped onto the walkway, the movement of the city continuing behind her, while something quieter settled into place ahead. Her anxiety was getting the best of her. She looked around her, trying to figure out if anyone was following her, trying not to draw attention to herself, not enough to fully interrupt her movement, but just enough to allow her awareness to widen, to stretch outward in that subtle, instinctive way that required no conscious decision. Her gaze shifted without appearing to, catching reflections in darkened windows, the faint suggestion of motion behind her, the ordinary presence of strangers moving through their own routines. Nothing lingered. Nothing followed. And yet, the absence did not feel as reassuring as it should have. Morgan reached for her phone, dialed, lifting it to her ear as she approached the entrance. Jade answered quickly. "Tell me you made it home," Jade said. "Your paranoia is rubbing off on me." "I'm at my building," Morgan said, her voice quieter now, her attention still divided between the conversation and the space around her. "Just checking." "Okay," Jade replied, her tone shifting just enough to register. "Checking what, exactly?" "I don't know," Morgan admitted. "Just making sure." "I saw him again, at the subway entrance. He was there, and then he just disappeared," Morgan said, with concern in her voice. "Saw who, exactly?" Jade asked. "The creepy man from earlier today," Morgan said, trying to squash the panic coming to the surface. "All right," Jade said, and though her voice remained light, there was something more deliberate beneath it now. "We're not panicking yet. Breathe. Now take a second. Look around. Do the full SEAL team sweep. Anything look weird?" Morgan turned slightly, allowing her gaze to move more intentionally this time, tracing the edges of the space with quiet precision. The sidewalk remained undisturbed. The street beyond moved as it always did, indifferent and continuous. No one stood watching. No one lingered where they should not. "There's nothing," she said. "Good," Jade replied. "We like nothing. Nothing is underrated." Morgan allowed herself a small exhale. "I'm going inside." "Lock the door," Jade said. "And maybe don't investigate any mysterious noises tonight. That's how people get sequels." "I'm not investigating anything." "Another classic line," Jade said. "Call me tomorrow so I know you survived the night." "I will." "Go eat your pizza," Jade added. "And try not to spiral into a full existential crisis before bed." The line ended. Morgan lowered the phone slowly and slipped it back into her pocket before reaching to unlock the door. The handle turned with familiar resistance, the hinge giving slightly before yielding, and she stepped inside, pulling it closed behind her with more care than necessary. For a moment, she remained there, listening. The hallway offered nothing in return. It stood as it always had, still and unremarkable, the faint echo of distant movement somewhere beyond her immediate awareness. There was no indication that anything had followed her, no sign that the unease she carried had any place within these walls. Even so, she did not move immediately. Her hand remained on the door a moment longer before she turned the lock, testing it once, then again. The repetition automatic, quiet, grounding. Only then did she step away, allowing herself to exhale, though the release felt incomplete. Her apartment greeted her with its usual stillness, a contained and familiar quiet that should have settled something within her. She moved through the space without thinking too closely about it, setting her bag down, slipping off her shoes, letting routine take hold where certainty could not. The small, ordinary sounds of evening followed. The soft hum of the oven as it warmed, the distant, muffled presence of neighbors living their own unremarkable lives just beyond the walls. She chose a frozen pizza without consideration, slid it into the oven and set the timer. The action as practiced and unremarkable as everything else she had done that day. It was enough. It was simple. It required nothing from her. For a time, the world held. She settled onto the couch with her latest book, her attention drifting across the page in uneven intervals, catching on certain lines while losing others entirely. The words did not anchor her as they usually did. Instead, they seemed to exist alongside her thoughts rather than replacing them, unable to draw her fully away from the quiet awareness that had not left her since the street. Every so often, she found herself listening again. Not deliberately, not with intent, but with that same subtle awareness, as though something just beyond perception might make itself known if she remained still long enough. It did not. The timer sounded. The evening continued. Nothing intruded. Nothing shifted. Nothing confirmed what she had seen. By the time she prepared for bed, the tension had softened. Not gone, but dulled at the edges, worn down by the steady insistence of ordinary things. The familiar rhythm of her routine, lights off, the quiet settling of the room, the weight of the blankets, began to draw her towards sleep with a slow, unremarkable certainty. She allowed it. Sleep came gradually. The dream did not. It arrived without transition, without the soft negotiation that usually marked the boundary between waking and sleep, replacing one state with the other so completely that there was no moment in which she could say she had crossed over. One reality simply gave way to the next, as though the space between them had never existed at all. Morgan became aware of the uneasy stillness first, and within it, the figures. They stood in formation, faceless, silent, watching. Their presence pressing inward from every direction in a way that felt both familiar and inescapable. She recognized the space immediately, recognized the structure of it, the way it held her within it, the way it dictated what would come next. There had always been a pattern to this, a sequence that unfolded with quiet, relentless precision. She did not move. She did not need to. They would. They always do. The understanding settled into her without effort, as natural as breath, as inevitable as the slow tightening of distance that would soon begin. It had never failed before. The pattern held. It always held. And so she waited. The stillness remained. At first, it did not feel wrong. Not immediately. There had always been a pause before the movement began, a brief suspension of time that marked the moment just before the pattern revealed itself. This could have been that pause. It should have been. Morgan's awareness sharpened as she watched them, her focus narrowing, attuning itself to the smallest possible shift, the slightest indication that the sequence had begun. Nothing changed. The figures did not move. The space did not shift. The silence did not break. Time, if it was passing at all, did so without leaving any trace behind. A thought began to form. Not sudden, not sharp, but slow and unwelcome, rising from somewhere deeper than conscious reasoning. This was not the pause. The realization did not come all at once. It settled gradually, piece by piece, each moment reinforcing what the last had suggested, but not yet confirmed. The pattern was not waiting to continue. It had failed to begin. Morgan slowly blinked, exhaling the breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The motion was small, instinctive, a reflex so ordinary it should have carried no consequence at all. When her eyes opened again, the distance had changed. The figures were closer. Not by enough to measure, not by enough to justify alarm, but enough that the difference could not be dismissed, could not be reconciled with what she had seen only a moment before. Morgan gasped. She searched for the movement that should have explained it, the shift she must have missed, the subtle advance that had escaped her attention. There was none. The stillness remained intact, the formation unbroken. No step had been taken. No motion had occurred. And yet, they were closer. The space between them had altered without passing through the moments that should have led there, as though something within the sequence had been removed entirely, leaving only the result behind. A second thought followed the first, quieter but far more dangerous. The pattern had not failed. It had changed. Morgan felt it then, not as fear, not yet, but as a tightening awareness, a subtle recalibration of everything she thought she understood about this place. The dream had always unfolded around her, indifferent to her presence, fixed in its structure and immune to interruption. This did not feel indifferent. This felt responsive. In all the years of having the same dream, she realized that she never thought about what she should do if it ever changed. No disaster recovery plan, no contrived alternate endings. Morgan was frozen in fear, unequipped to handle this new reality, not knowing what caused the nightmare to change, afraid of what comes next. For the first time, the dream did not feel like something unfolding around her. It felt like something was adjusting in response to her presence. She held her gaze steady, unwilling to look away, unwilling to give whatever this was the opportunity to shift again without her seeing it. The figures did not move. Their faceless attention remained fixed on her, unbroken, unblinking, absolute. And within that perfect stillness, something else began to settle into place. The leader stood slightly ahead of the others, as it always had, its position unchanged and yet no longer neutral. The absence of a face no longer felt like emptiness, but like something withheld, something that should have been visible but was not. Morgan became aware, slowly and with growing certainty, that the stillness was no longer passive. It was being maintained, held, as though the space itself had chosen this moment, this configuration, and was refusing to allow it to resolve. Her thoughts slowed, not from calm but from pressure, as though something unseen had begun to narrow the distance between them in a way that did not rely on movement at all. She did not blink again. She did not move. And still, the sense of closeness deepened. Not visually, not physically, but undeniably. The boundary between them, once fixed and predictable, no longer felt stable. It no longer felt like distance at all, but like something thinner, something conditional, something that could be crossed without warning and without motion, just as the last shift had been. The understanding came then, quiet and absolute. She had been waiting for them to move, but movement was no longer required. For the first time, the dream did not feel like something repeating. It felt like something adjusting, something observing, something that had recognized her not as a participant within the pattern, but as the reason for its change. And within that realization, as the silence held and the figures remained impossibly still, a final, inescapable certainty settled into place. Whatever had changed was aware of her.
Weavers, the pattern has shifted. She stands where the sequence has broken, where distance no longer protects and stillness no longer means safety. She has been noticed. And now the path divides. Will she speak and break the silence that has always held? Will she force herself awake and escape before the dream deepens? Or will she reach forward and touch what has already crossed too close? Choose. The weave remembers. Weave responsibly.